Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here today. We're just admitting a couple more people. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'll leave some information about the Empowering Small Minnesota Communities project in the chat. But just to start us off, my name is Torey Erin, and I'm a research fellow at the Minnesota Design Center at the University of Minnesota. And this webinar series is part of the Empowering Small Minnesota Communities project, which is a community-centered collaboration with the University of Minnesota. Partners developed to strengthen small communities through the development of resilient infrastructure. Program support includes developing and strengthening project plans for long-term goals, and laying the groundwork for proposals and funding for opportunities at the federal, local, and state level. Today, we have an exciting presentation on community design strategies with three different presenters. So we'll start with Tim Griffin, who's an architect and urban designer, and then myself and Joseph Hang are MDC research fellows, and we'll speak a little bit about some community design strategies on the West Side in St. Paul. Again, thank you so much for being here. We really aim with this webinar series to serve examples from professional experiences in the field and help communities that face similar challenges share some best practices and innovative solutions. So we're really looking forward to Tim's talk today. Tim Griffin is an architect and urban designer, and he's going to speak with us about sustainable development goals that can be leveraged to measure progress on creating more livable communities. So Tim, thanks for being here. Let's have you get us started.
Great, Tori. Thank you for that introduction. And can you see my screen there?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, thanks everybody. Glad to be here today. As Tori mentioned, I'm a architect and urban designer and have recently been working with the ESMC team on several projects in Baxter, War Road, Baudette, and Embarrass. And my talk today is I've also over the last 5 years or so been working in trying to understand the Sustainable Development Goals and their impact on design thinking. And so my talk today is really reflections on leveraging the goals. I don't have it figured out. I'm looking forward to the conversation. And this is by no means prescriptive. It's really it is in fact reflections. And so it's kind of where my head's at and the feedback that I've been getting in collaboration with communities. So the questions I wanted to address today are what are the Sustainable Development Goals? How are they used? Number three, why could they or should they be part of a community scale strategy? Where are we going from here? And why is this different? Why is this worth your consideration? I'm doing a low-tech Zoom presentation here. The little hand in the upper corner is very scientific poll. It'll show up occasionally through the talk, and I'd like you all to everybody practice saying yes, at least for the first time. So click your hand signal there. It's under what is it under? It's the under more, under more. But people can just practice pushing that because I'm going to ask a few times and see if that works. Okay. All right. So first of all, what are the Sustainable Development Goals? And they are a set of goals that have been established really at the United Nations scale, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about that. Scale is so important, especially ESMC is empowering and emphasis on small communities. So that's almost the other end of the spectrum from global, but we're all we're all connected. We're on the same planet, and we're about doing some different things. So the goals were the Sustainable Development Goals were developed around the idea of the back in 2000 or so, the Millennium Development Goals, and then they were consolidated into our current conversation of the 17 goals and published around 2015. So we're approaching 10 years with those being in place, and one of the aspects of this that emerged was this notion of equity and universal access, referring to individuals and communities' access to essential services, resources, and opportunities, including healthcare, education, clean water, sanitation, energy, information technology, and infrastructure and jobs. So you can see how a lot of these themes and policies have worked their way in, and they are reflected and embedded in these 17 goals. There's a list of the std.org on the bottom there. I invite you to click on that. I won't go through them all, but you can see that there are 17 of them. And some of the work, we've been doing a lot of work with Spatial, the university's GIS group, and they've been tracking and looking and encouraging the use of SDGs, leading that initiative, really at the state level to the community level, and have assembled a lot of data at the county level, which I'll talk more about as well. And you can see here, these are the frequency of the SDGs that you'll frequently hear responded. I know Joseph and his team have worked on those in different projects, and frankly, a lot of times that they're at the end of the project where you kind of say, well, how do these ideas relate to the Sustainable Development Goals? So the goals don't really lead as design thinking, but they're a way of organizing and measuring the impact, which is very, very important. In community design, the SDGs are found in many sectors of our economy. The University of Minnesota strategic plan is organized around Sustainable Development Goals. They really have a root in Fortune 500 companies' strategic plan and performance measures, and they are also robustly used in county public health plans. They can be used in community comprehensive plans, although that's not as widespread. And the regional development organizations across the state embed them in their community comprehensive economic development strategies, the SEDS, which is the workplace for economic development. The state was just awarded a prize for evidence-based governance and using facts and data in terms of policy setting. So there's a conversation at the state level. University of Minnesota is a land-grant institution and works in urban and rural portions of the state, and so it intrigues us in terms of what these might be about and how they can be used and how they are being used in the state currently. Every year, the United Nations, back to the global scale, publishes a ranking of the 179 countries or so in terms of where they stand on a national or on a national level. Okay, and so the U.S. score is 74.4. I think the Scandinavian countries are up in the 90s, and you can see where it ranks in the overall piece. And then, but of course, we're made up of 50 states, and we are also, again, the title is at the local. We're talking about the local scale. Okay. Yeah. I've been doing some work at the county scale around the Sustainable Development Goals, and we've managed to a team with Spatial and other folks has managed to create a statewide map at this county scale. All 17 goals have indicators I'll talk a little bit more about that are played out at the county scale. So a county is still not a I wouldn't call it a community scale piece of governance, but it is connected largely to the public health area, and also it's connected to funding in terms of federal and state bonding and funding. So it starts to put a perspective or a lens on the difference between the 87 counties in Minnesota. Going across from the left, obviously, this is a global conversation in North America. You can see Minnesota as a small state. It's part of the Midwest region. And you can also see that across the bottom, the idea of using GIS information and various Esri platforms in order to display and analyze the 17 goals. I mentioned at the county scale, we've been working in Marshall County, Minnesota, which is part of the Northwest Regional Development Corporation. And so you can begin to see how this starts to work. And the idea is starting to drill down into the community scale. For example, we've worked in Warren, Minnesota, and starting to look at the goals at a community scale. And you can even, which is about 10 kilometers square or 6.2 miles, which corresponds also to the size of a township. And then we can extrapolate down to the district scale, small area scale, and then eye level experience, switching from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional modeling. Finally, the point I was going to make that from an introspective level, you can almost look at these and ask them as questions of yourself at a family and a personal scale. So it does kind of start to span it starts to personalize, if you will, this idea of scale and what does that mean to you as an individual, family unit, community unit, which I find quite interesting. Just really quickly, you can see the database that's behind, for example, SDG number 3, good health and well-being, and the indicators that have been mapped countywide. So I think the idea here is that it comes from kind of the world of analysis in terms of abstract concepts. What the GIS does is start to let you spatialize it on mapping, and that's a jump that isn't made, in my opinion, nearly enough. That a lot of times they just become policy discussions that really don't take into it. Not only don't take people into account personally, but don't take spatial geography into account. And progressing through spatial geography, it being 2-dimensional, and we experience our communities in a 3-dimensional fashion. This still is a bit of an abstract discussion until we internalize it as a personal value, and it has an effect on our well-being and just our sense of place and community, so that it is there is consensus to use this conversation as a way of getting at addressing needs, and also tracking on them and monitoring how progress is being made. Okay. So a lot of what we're talking about, and probably maybe just a show of hands, I should have really asked this earlier, is how many people are, and Tori, you can just watch the reaction, but how many people are familiar to some degree or another with the Sustainable Development Goals? Are we getting
we have
a
about
sense of what? Very scientific, right?
Looks like we have about 6 people.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes a good segue to my my next slide, is that where a lot of the oops, I'm sorry. a lot of the emphasis currently is socializing the goals, having these kinds of conversations, and seeing if they in fact can improve the overall quality of life of communities. And so one of the most recent events, and it will be ongoing. I talked about regional development organizations earlier. In West Central Minnesota, the West Central Initiative had sponsored this conversation about the 17 goals, and it's called the 17 Rooms discussion. Again, it's really focused on the goals, but it's beginning to look at how these can be used locally, local action with global goals, and how it can form economic development, public health, and community well-being strategies, both at the county, at the region, and the state level. So stay tuned for this. I'm going to you can see the see chat there. I'm just going to put this link into chat, and you can kind of get the latest in terms of the conversation. And I'd encourage you to click on the link here. That's what I put in chat, and you can kind of see a summary of the event. But you can also get a sense of the energy around this in terms of where people are coming from and what the response has been. Skip this one here. So the idea then is, how do you, and I'm going to kind of conclude my remarks here, we're starting to put them in context of community planning process, and Joseph and Tori are going to talk more about this in more detail. But so how do you put this conversation and this data acquisition kind of in a community design sequence? And there, it gets at a number of things. That it recognizes that there are multiple points of view, and so really the goals that are prioritized will be different for residents, for government units, for institutions, for developers. In conversation, these groups could select their priority goals, and 17 is a lot. And I think that's one of the challenges of the method is that as I showed you earlier, community scale tends to gravitate towards certain types of goals around infrastructure and whatnot, but also those priorities aren't shared across these different points of view. At this point, you can compare the different groups and see what the common goals are shared among groups to start to show that would start to form the basis for an area framework or community strategies, as we're talking about in ESMC. And you can go through then and through negotiation and conversation, really wind up with a handful of goals and a handful of smaller strategies that can go together to create your plan. Now, this is all kind of information running in the background. We don't expect people to be, experiencing the analytics, but we do hope, or I do hope, that people will be interested in what the basis of some of these suggestions are, and how they can measure how they can measure that impact. And in fact, when you talk about this kind of community design research, you have an overall kind of worldview of your sense of values, but it really comes down to tactics and steps and strategies that go into making that. And SDGs kind of live in that world, along with other tools and situations that you create with the project. And so, there are a number of community design approaches. This certainly is not limited, but it's informative because there are this area of geodesign working extensively with GIS as a foundation in negotiating solutions, compared with indigenous design thinking that takes a whole different approach to the length of time and relationship building that has to occur in order, as you can see, for design to occur kind of in the center circle. I apologize for the size, Tori. Co-design, which comes largely out of out of medical planning and product design, but it takes a real emphasis on equal designers, not star designers, but equal designers. And then how does that affect what maybe 90% of us see practice in traditional urban design, which is different than these other three in those different categories. And so I think the idea of we're kind of building or observing a process as we go through ESMC, but at the end of the day, it's creating a community scale strategy, and this notion of discovery, including the SDGs, includes the GIS spaces that are assembled, the stories that are told, and just the relationships that are developed around the process, around the place, the people in the place, the pride that people have in their place, and also the fears that they have in terms of where they're going. Measuring and celebrating really the half dozen or so initiatives that can emerge out of consensus as we go forward. So I'm looking forward to hearing how Torey and Joseph are going to kind of weave this into to a large degree or not at all, but over the next year, there'll be more conversations around SDGs. So thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Tim. Just wanted to reiterate too, if folks have questions, feel free to add them in the chat, and we'll leave a little bit of room for a Q&A after Joseph and I present about some of our work in community co-design on the west side in St. Paul. So Joseph, do you want to go ahead and get us started with that?
All right. So I have a whole bunch of talking point, but I have it on my phone. So you see me staring down. I'm just looking at my phone just to collect my thoughts here as we kind of talk about the work we've been doing with West Coast on the west side of St. Paul. But before I begin our kind of presentation here, I just want to thank Tim for sharing your process with us. And also thank everyone who is here with us to just learn about different types of community engagement strategies. I'm excited and also thrilled to be here. And I want to thank you, Torey, for organizing these West seminar, and more importantly, holding space for our communities near and far, and allowing the MDC Design Assist to share our process so far. So this afternoon, Tori and I are going to share with you all about our community engagement process that we've been co-designing, co-developing, co-creating with the West Side Community Organization, also known as WESCO. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank many of our research assistants who are present here. Julie, to Kiona, Rachel, Nintita, Zabeda, Zhou, and many of the volunteers and active member of West Coast Land Use Circle, as well as their Robert Street study groups. These are the true organizer and true participant to this process here. So with that being said, a little context before I dive into some of the stuff that Tori and I have been working on. And with that, I want to kind of just talk about the context of how we got to where we are. This collaboration with West Coast was made possible through a generous contribution from the Bush Foundation Ecosystem Grant. And as a recipient of the Bush Ecosystem Grant, the Minnesota Design Center was able to launch Design Assist. Design Assist, well, first of all, we all know that accessing design assistance can be tricky. It could be overwhelming sometimes. It could be intimidating, but more importantly, it could be expensive, right? Especially for underserved and underrepresented communities. And for these organizations and individuals, these challenges pose tremendous obstacles. And oftentimes it prevents ideas from being materialized. So in the summer of 2024, just a couple months ago, MDC decided to launch Design Assist. And this initiative is meant to provide design support and assistance to underserved and underrepresented community in the Twin City and the larger Minnesota and the greater Minnesota at no cost. And so in the summer of 2024, we were approached by a member of the West Coast Land Use Circle, Robert Street Study Group, and now a board member of West Coast to help the two committee, Land Use Circle and the Robert Street Study Group, to reimagine Robert Street as a destination. These were some of the initial problems that were presented to Design Assist. That MnDOT engagement wasn't transparent. That Robert Street still functioned as a highway conduit. Robert Street felt unsafe for pedestrians. Residents and the community felt unheard. Robert Street still needed a lot of infrastructural improvement, and Robert Street lacked identity. Oh. So we also thought that this would be a great opportunity to look at resetting this community engagement process. And so Design Assist came up with a process that we're still working on and we're still refining. But it's a way for us to marry design thinking and system thinking to advocating for a more transparent co-creating process, and potentially a alternative to the traditional agency approach to engaging folks. Within our process here, reset stands for research, empathize, solution, engagement, and take action. So with that, I'll put into context now to West Coast Robert Street. For folks who aren't familiar with the West Side or Robert Street, it is directly south of downtown St. Paul and north of West St. Paul. Robert Street basically connect downtown St. Paul to West St. Paul, Emmett Grove Heights, and Cottage Grove. These are three areas of Robert Street at the west side that kind of spaced out in 20-year increment. I think from these photos here, you can tell that obviously the west side and Robert Street has changed a lot. And the physical landscape of the west side has indeed changed. But as people remain resilient and rich and have overcome urban renewal, racial covenants, redlining, displacement, and let's be honest, the car. Which brings us to Robert Street, destination Robert Street. So in 2020, MnDOT put out a reconstruction plan for Robert Street that would do a couple of things. It would it would include improving sidewalk, boulevards, and trees, to update curbs, gutters, and stormwater system, to repave and mark lane, to update underground utilities, and to improve traffic and create safer corridor. All this in preparation for two large infrastructural projects. One is the G line, the BRT line that is being proposed to run through Robert Street, jump onto Cesar Chavez, onto State, and then back onto Robert Street. The second would be to introduce a bicycle lane on Robert Street that would further connect some of the existing bicycle network. And so while all these infrastructure improvements are much needed for Robert Street, Westco also saw this as an opportunity to ask the residents, what else could Robert Street become? So this is a diagram, looking at MnDOT's process so far, examining the condition to engage in the community through an online survey, and then just um, starting to work in the spirit of design. Again, we thought this might be a good point in the MnDOT West Coast relationship to pause and think about how do we start to reset this? That we know while the infrastructure plan is happening, how can we bring a social component to it to reimagine what Robert Street could be? Um, with that, I'm going to just talk about one of the strategies that we have implemented so far. Just to kind of get feedbacks and feel for what residents are thinking. So far in our recess process, we've been diving mostly into the research and emphases portion, and the other portion will come along. But we realize that these are the two that we really want to have a better understanding for. So I'm going to talk a little about the co-design strategy that's related to reflecting. And mostly is we want resident participant to use words to connect them to these specific spaces along Robert Street. We asked the participant, we had so far over about 150. We asked these two questions, what Robert Street is and what Robert Street could be. We asked them to jot down a sentence for each of these questions, summarize that sentence into a noun, and then later to an adjective. And these are some of the responses that we got from our participant regarding Robert Street is it is a meaningful place, a critical place for community, in need of more gathering spaces, right? Was it noun-wise, a challenge, an opportunity, a place for people and economy, the main artery to the west side, a gateway, an adjective, potential, historic. Obviously, there are more, but we just kind of pull out some things that resonated more, or if we heard more from folks regarding Robert Street could be. We heard vibrant quarters on the west side. Oh, sorry, I'm just my bars in the way I can't quite read what we wrote here. A walkable community, a historic street, a greener, walkable place for all, a main destination in St. Paul, a creative and STEM economic powerhouse. In terms of adjective, colorful, happier, greener, safer, walkable, active, and in noun, opportunity, community, vibrant, and safe. With that, I'll let Tori talk more about the other exercise and strategies.
Thanks so much for introducing us to the project. Another exercise that we have done with residents is to do asset and challenge mapping. And so we printed out these maps of our boundary on Robert Street on the west side, and we asked participants to map their personal assets, what they find valuable in their community, along with their areas of concern, and also areas where they feel safe. Next slide. So in our assessment, we had noticed a cluster of the assets in the District del Sol neighborhood, which is the sort of larger circle, which is where Cesar Chavez and Robert Street meet. It's an active business corridor. And then also toward Harriet Island and the Mississippi River, along with the high school. And then for areas of concern, that Robert Street corridor is the main area of concern for both vehicular traffic and pedestrian use. And then areas of safety, again, seeing a similar trend to the asset map centralized in the District del Sol. These are some of the maps of participants. Throughout the process, we have been updating a community mural board with residents so that our process is completely transparent. And we're doing vigorous archiving of all of this research with our research assistants at the center because we saw that as one of the main elements of the MnDOT community engagement process is that there isn't a ton of transparency. And through listening sessions, we have heard this from a lot of residents. Next slide. So after a few community engagement activities, we had sort of realized that MnDOT, or excuse me, MDC and Wesco, we had our own design problem, which was we had low meeting attendance. The community, we found a lot of people were unaware of the MnDOT project. The MnDOT timeline was coming up very quickly, and we felt pressured to have a ton of community engagement in a short period of time. Community voices felt unheard, and we also had some issues with our meeting time and our accessibility, and then meeting organization. And so we regrouped, and we came up with a new strategy. Next slide. So we wanted to do a large-scale mapping activity with residents on the west side to engage more folks. And we targeted a larger event, which is the Football Fiesta, a high school football event that includes a parade and street vendors, and they block off major roads on the west side for this event. And we wanted to host a booth with Wesco and MDC in a mapping exercise to map priorities. And at first, we had divided these icons into several categories of environment, circulation, development, programming, and neighborhood identity. And we brought these icons to the community and realized that these aren't super universal. And so based on our feedback from community, we decided to revise our icon strategy to simplify it. And so we simplified our strategy to narrow it down to these 6 categories, which are improve and connect, play and entertain, rest and grow, live and sleep, make and identify, eat and drink, and buy and sell. And so at the Football Fiesta, we designed this large-scale 4x8-foot map, which we printed out showing our project site boundaries, and we had our icons printed as stickers. And we put a piece of film on top of the map so that we could reuse these maps at various community engagements. And we also included a couple of boards with Robert Street, the first exercise that we did with folks, which was what Robert Street is and what Robert Street could be to gain more information on what the community priorities are. These are some of our results and then some of the clustering that we're noticing in our design process. We mapped roughly 400 priorities, with 3/4 of them being from the West Side residents, and then 1/4 of the participants with ties to the West Side, people who either grew up there or had family members living there or who worked there. And we did another community engagement exercise using the same map. We didn't have the attendance that we did on with the Football Fiesta, but we saw this as an opportunity to collaborate with Wesco members and really train them in the process of gathering this information and hosting the events and empowering them with the tools themselves. We're also spatializing our priorities in an ArcGIS map. Again, looking at transparency and data and really mapping a qualitative, making a qualitative map of the West Side. So when we have shared this map with folks, you can really zoom in on to Robert Street and click on an icon and see which resident, their name, and what their priorities are for Robert Street. And what we've come up with so far is that a large majority of folks are hoping to improve and connect Robert Street. along with play and entertain and rest and grow. And we see this as a really positive, community, public response that people want. People want public gathering spaces. They want to feel safe in their neighborhood, and they want to have greater connection. So at this point in the process, as you saw from an earlier diagram, we're at the in the reset process at research and empathize. We have learned that design language needs to be easily understood to transcend culture, dialects, and experiences. And then, as far as next steps, representation needs to be inclusive and reflective of the community, including demographic representations. So we currently are working with WESCO on what communities that we are not serving in our community engagement and how we can serve them in the future. And then, as well as our partnership commitment, which it needs time. Participants and the partnership need clear understanding of capacity, priority, and project goals. We also want to empower WESCO members to implement small-scale engagements and outreach by giving them the tools and resources, and then collaborate with them on their upcoming 10-year comprehensive plan, specifically the land use portion of it, and utilize some of this information for future engagement opportunities. And then again, expanding, who are we missing input from? How can we connect with them? And then communication is very important as well. So archiving all resident information for future planning purposes, and then full transparency. Some really positive outcomes at this point have been the partnership and relationships that have been formed. Our sort of collaboration within the center between myself and Joseph and the research assistants. Everyone has been working really diligently on this big project. And also slowing the pace. Last night I was at a community engagement meeting with on the West Side, and MnDOT team has admitted that they did not get this right, and that they're taking the initiative to revise their approach. And so we see this as an opportunity to thread government agencies and community organizations and us as designers to reestablish a new commitment to the project and design on the West Side. So with all of that, we're happy to move into the question and answer part of the program. Thanks again, Joseph, for sharing your screen. Feel free to add anything in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute, you're welcome to do that.
Sounds good. I'm going to stop sharing. Perfect. All right.
It looks like Karen has a question.
Oh, great. Thanks, Tom. Go for it, Erin.
Hi, thank you. This has been so interesting. I'm really excited about what you've got going on and how you're going about doing it. And I'd like to ask if, well, let me just say this. There's a Northern Lights Express passenger rail line coming up through our area. Well, we're hoping. And there's going to be some transit stations along the way. It would be wonderful to have input from this group or this organization when these transit stations get designed, and what does the community want. One of them is going through the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe's reservation area. And I mean, to get their input on the design of this building and the outlying area around it. And I mean, I just see this as being such a awesome opportunity to really get some cultural engagement, like you said, community engagement. It just opens so many doors. So just wanted to throw that out there. I just think this is fabulous what you're doing. I love all of this overlaying and us, putting the sticky things on and getting the community so involved. And, people have a fear of what the unknown is. And then this would be an opportunity for the communities to get more involved and get their questions answered. So.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I'm just became aware of this line in the last couple of months, and it's really exciting, and also hope that the process involves community input.
Yeah, Karen, I would suggest definitely well, let's follow up on an email or something, and let's connect about how we can get involved with the Northern Light Commuter Rail and see
Oh,
if we can
great.
engage the community around some of these potential alignments and stations.
We want to do it right,
Yeah,
so we need to take the time and get the, folks involved. And yeah, I would like that, Joseph. Thank you very much.
perfect.
Joseph and Tori, do you want to talk about other design assist projects that you're also doing to give people a sense of the scope of and type of projects?
Yeah, sure. I can talk a little about some other design assist project. We've been working with our street along the Ocean Memorial Highway, kind of reimagining what that corridor could be. We have worked with Rondo Reconnect to create some visualization for the Land Bridge project on top of 94. Um, we are in conversation with folks at the city of La Crescent, working with them um, to put out an RFP as well as to rethink Indigenous Plaza on a pedestrian site there. So yeah, we're all over the place in terms of different scale of the project, primarily working in the spirit of urban design.
Thank
You
you,
want to add
Joseph.
anything
And
else?
Tori and Tim, do you want to talk at all about some of the ESMC projects you've been involved in?
Go
Tori?
ahead, Tori. Why don't you go first?
Sure. Yeah, I can add that I'm working on an Empowering Small Minnesota Communities project in Crookston, Minnesota, where we're implementing trail design and a large scale tree initiative, with a cluster of partners at this point in the project, including University of Minnesota Crookston and the Soil and Water Conservation District, and of course regional partners and MDC. We are doing a tree inventory with UMC. So they're hiring a student to do a tree inventory so that we can better prepare them for emerald ash borer, and do a tree phasing plan in Crookston. We're also looking at re, you know, reestablishing a biodiverse tree canopy while removing ash trees in Crookston to be utilized within the trail design as furniture for benches, mulch, garden beds, kayak storage bins, and then we're also doing some work on reorganizing some of the land ordinances around pollinator species. So we just started speaking with the Board of Soil and Water Resources, and we're also hosting community engagement exercises so that folks are aware of the project and that we can get more buy-in from community members that can be really taking leadership on some of these programs. That's just one of the ESMC projects that I'm working on. I'm also working on a project in Harris, with Center City and Lindstrom. So looking forward to sharing the more of those as they unfold, sharing more information about those.
Great. Thank you, Tori.
Tim,
Tim,
would
do
you
you
like
want?
to
Yeah.
share?
Sure, thank you. Thanks for that. It's interesting, the idea of the fear of the unknown and how complicated these projects are, and how that how that takes time to unpack and absorb. I'm working on four of the ESMC projects in small towns. Three of them are along the Highway 11 corridor between Badger and Bodette, and in between War Road. So those three communities, have their own aspirations going through and looking at different ideas, but they're also gathering periodically to talk about how they can reinforce each other. For example, Waro just built a new, quite phenomenal art center in the middle of their community, and now they're talking about how they can extend programming along that corridor line. So you mentioned the football game. Again, the idea in terms of participation of not holding your events on their own on their own terms, but rather trying to find events that are going to be fairly highly populated and asking for portions of people time to understand and contribute. So that's another piece. And then the fourth project I have is up in Embarrass, Minnesota, and they are looking at again this theme of community centers. They're building a timber hall lodge that they just know they need to have it to be able to convene in those areas. And there are examples really from around the state of those similar kinds of places. And probably more importantly, well, as importantly as a person or people who are willing to run and program those facilities. And the public art comes back through again with that pretty extensively as an area where you see this kind of a nice combination of interest, capability, and commitment to provide that dimension of community life. So yeah, so different urban and rural, but also a lot of the same basic community principles.
Thanks for sharing, Tim. Are there any other questions from the group? I know it seems like we have a shy cohort today.
Well, I suppose I'll chime in a little bit on another ESMC project I'm working on in Malacca. And that's been interesting. This was the city of Malacca had a piece of land out by Highway 169 and wanted to develop an industrial park. And as we worked with the community at a variety of locations, including before their football games seemed to be a theme here. They found out that the community had a much wider range of interests, from including dog parks and electric vehicle charging and a whole range of things. So the community engagement process has really expanded how the city has thought about that piece of land that they have, and then also because the ESMC is really about sustainable infrastructure, we've been working with the engineering firm Stantec, who's the city engineers, to think creatively about what green infrastructure might look like, how we might handle water and energy generation more creatively on this land. And so one of the great things about these processes is that they open up our thinking about what's possible. And also one of the things we found is that sometimes even in smaller communities, not all the property owners know each other. And so just going through the process, people were meeting each other for the first time and starting to share their common interests. So I found that the process itself has value almost regardless of the outcome. It's really good to get communities together talking about the future of their place and to start to envision what's possible. So it's been really rewarding work.
I wanted to chime in too, and thank you, Thomas. Karen and I are on a team for another ESMC project in Mille Lacs County as well. And so, Thomas, I appreciate you. I'm actually from Malacca, and I think these processes and learning about all these programs is super helpful for our community. Our focus is on transportation and creating some either hubs and obviously seeing what our community needs across counties in our area. And so I really look forward to future engagement and potentially being involved in some of these projects going forward, to utilize some of these boots on the ground strategies. And so I just wanted to throw myself out there too to make a connection, and excited for our future in our rural communities. So thank you all who've been presenting. This is really helpful information today too.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank
And-
you. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was just going to thank you, Tori, Joseph, and Tim for your presentations. You're a great team, and we have some of our other team members here, and it's been a wonderful group to work with, and we're quite excited about what lies ahead in doing this work. So thank you all.
Yes, thanks everyone for joining today. As mentioned in the chat, we'll have this video webinar available, and we'll send out to all of the ESMC applicants and participants, and hope that you'll catch the next one in early February. So we'll be sending out an invitation about pollinator habitats. So thanks again, Joseph. It's always a pleasure working with you. You inspire me in so many ways, and your leadership is invaluable. And thanks so much, Tim, for presenting on community design strategies and sustainability. Yeah, again, like wonderful team. So thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Tori. Bye-bye, everyone.
All right, bye, everyone.
Take care.
Stay warm.
Thank you.